Thank you. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me today. Today I'm going to kind of go over exactly what he said, establishing alfalfa with the summer annual nurse crop, looking at whether it's planted kind of in the late spring or late summer timeframe. And so I'm fairly new to Iowa State. I've been here a little over a year. And so as I was thinking about how to develop a program, one thing that is pretty glaring to me is as we start looking at national weather events that are occurring, our weather seems to be becoming more and more unpredictable every single year. This is from NOAA, and it is an estimation of the number of billion-dollar disaster events that have occurred across the U.S. And so, as we can see, it seems like we're having a continually increase in national or disaster events, particularly in the last 5, 10 years. And so, every thing that we have to do, we have to think about how can we try to uh, prepare for these or rebound from them. And so one of the things that I'd like to think about is how can we make our systems as resilient as possible as we move forward, and how can we rebound from these events? Because a lot of times these events are going to be detrimental, but how can we go from having a stable environment and then our environment having these natural disasters? How can we rebound quickly and make sure that we're recovering as fast as possible for our economics, for our bottom dollar, and to ensure we're staying in business? And so one of those things that I'm a part of is a group called the Agricultural Resilience. We're the Resilience Cap, and we're looking at how can we make our systems more resilient through diversification, perenniality, and circularity. And alfalfa is a major part of this. Alfalfa, as Marta was talking about, can supply a great nitrogen credit, fixating nitrogen in its root systems with a symbiotic relationship. It has perenniality. We're having roots growing on the soil all year round, keeping the soil in place. And then lastly, diversification. And I've seen a lot of interesting things coming out with diversification and intercropping with corn silage and alfalfa systems. Um, Really interesting talk on planting green into cereal rye. And all of these things are ways that we're trying to increase our yields throughout the year and improve soil structure and improve our systems. And so, why summer annuals? Why could we be considering uh, establishing alfalfa with our summer annuals? And so, when I look at summer annuals, I'm seeing high yield potentials. Um, a lot of times, we can be seeing 5 to 7 tons per acre on a dry matter basis. If we're cutting them at the right time, they're really high quality as well, and they can grow in hot, dry environments. They're very well adapted to arid environments, and they also work well in a multi-cut system. And so that's one of the keys when I was thinking about this system, why summer annuals could work really well is if we can come in, clear off the top of the canopy, open it up for light penetration for that alfalfa. And so when we're looking at developing this, was looking at, okay, what could the first year look like? How could we establish these together? And so there was a couple thoughts that came along with it. And first, we're going to plant them at the same time. And so in the late spring, once those soils are warm enough for the summer annuals, we'll plant the summer annual and alfalfa together. The summer annual is planted on 30-inch rows, and the alfalfa was on, I believe, 6-inch rows. Plant them at the same time. Oh, and then harvest the summer annual and a multi-cut system. So we harvested it 3 times this year. And then that way, as that summer annual canopy comes up and starts closing off, we can clear it off again, get some extra tonnage with the summer annual while opening up the summer annual for light penetration. Our second idea was after that first summer annual harvest, we planted a late summer planting of alfalfa. So once we harvested the first cutting, we came through and planted alfalfa in between those rows. And then we continued to harvest that for a second cutting again, just clearing off the top, giving that alfalfa a chance to establish with greater light penetration. And then over winter, the alfalfa will be able to provide soil cover, keeping soil in place, and then hopefully a good production year this coming spring. And so we set up this field and we wanted to look at a variety of different alfalfas. Work coming out of Wisconsin has demonstrated that in their corn silage settings, there are some alfalfa varieties that do better than others. And so we wanted to have different varieties available there. And so we had our low lignin, we had a potato leafhopper resistant, and we had a conventional just alfalfa variety that we used. And then we had our nuns. So we had a monoculture of our summer annuals. And then our summer annuals, we use sorghum-sudangrass and sudangrass. We use these two because of their high yield potential, and then also they work really well when we put them into multi-cut systems in comparison to, say, a forage sorghum that's going to not regrow as well necessarily as our sorghum sudangrass and sudangrass. We had those two planting dates. This is one thing that I think we did get a little off on. Our first planting date was June 14th. I wish we would have been about 2 weeks earlier. As you'll see in a second, that incurred some weed pressure that came in with that being the sorghum sudangrass on the 30-inch rows and later alfalfa establishment. And then our second one after that first cutting was on August 6th. And so this is kind of what the field looked like. If you are looking at the photo on the bottom right, this was our spring planted alfalfa, and this was taken in about mid-September. We had just had another cutting of the sorghum sudangrass. This is about 2 weeks after that cutting. This is our fall planted alfalfa. Um, this photo was actually taken a little earlier. This one was taken before we took our second cutting of that sorghum sudangrass and sudangrass. And so you can see we can start to row the alfalfa. So we were pretty excited about the potential for this establishment. We collected data throughout the season. We took yield and species composition. We're doing that in the late fall and this coming spring. Plant counts and light availability, trying to see if this system is actually giving us better light penetration throughout the year to hopefully lead to better success of that stand establishment. Our summer annuals, we took yield from every cutting, and then we also did plant composition as well. And so some in-season observations that we saw that we really didn't get a lot of notes on, but something that I found really interesting is that on the top left of these two photos, this the first photo on the top left was our spring planted, and since we got it so late, we actually did have a lot of weed pressure that started to come in. We had a lot of water hemp, but as we saw the season go on, we saw that weed pressure dissipate because as we were taking the cuttings of the sorghum sudangrass and we took them at a 6-inch height, so a little high for alfalfa, we were trying to minimize any pressure on that stand and focus on that regrowth of the sudangrass. We were removing those weeds, and then by the end of the season, we had a fairly clean stand of alfalfa within those rows. But something really interesting with the fall planting, we were able to row cultivate after we took our first cutting of the summer annuals. With row cultivating, then we were able to plant into a really clean stand, and we did not have much weed pressure in that fall planting. And so, with getting into a little bit of what we saw this summer, we were able to see variation in that light penetration into the canopy. And so, this graph basically, the closer to one it is, the means that there's more light getting intercepted by the alfalfa canopy. And so, the lower the number is, that means more of the sorghum sudangrass and sudangrass are basically closing the canopy, and they're not getting as much light into it. And so what we saw was right before our first cut, our harvest, which was on early August, we saw that we went from pretty much the canopy was closed to the canopy opening up again completely. And then within 2 weeks later, the canopy was starting to close again in later August. But we did see a good week span to 2 weeks to a week and a half span that we saw that canopy was considerably more open. We were getting more light into the canopy during that time. And then by the time that the canopy was really closing again, we had our next harvest, which opened up that canopy as well. And so we were starting to see increased light interception. One thing that we unfortunately couldn't control was rain, and we did not get a lot of rain this fall. So we think there was some slower growth due to that. But overall, when we started taking our stand counts, because we did want to focus on the alfalfa and how the alfalfa was doing in these stands. We saw that there was a significant interaction due to alfalfa and planting in summer and planting date. And so the alfalfa overall stand counts varied among our alfalfa varieties that we used. Our conventional type did seem to hold on to the best and had the most plants in the stand, while our potato leaf hopper resistant did start to diminish a bit in each of our stands. And then when we were looking, comparing our fall to our spring cutting dates, we saw that our later planting date, we still had more plants in the stand in general. And we did not see that variation when we start looking at the Harv Extra and the potato leaf hopper resistance. The red is our fall and the yellow is our spring. And then we did see an effect due to our summer annuals. And so our summer annuals put pressure and some competition on the alfalfa. And we were hoping to get about 25 plants per square foot. At this point, we were a little below that for each of our sorghum-sudangrass and sudangrass, and for our fall and spring cutting. But from some other collaborators that I've talked to, and we know that alfalfa has a really good potential of filling in gaps and filling in the stand. We're hopeful for this spring to see how the sand comes out of that. We did see that our monocultures, our alfalfa loans, did very well. We were getting acceptable plant counts at that point. And then lastly, we wanted to see that interaction between our alfalfa and what summer annual it was planted with. And so our alfalfa by summer annual, if we start to see, we do see that those monocultures did have greater plant counts per square foot. But we were still in the acceptable range for a couple of our combinations. Our conventional type did hold on the best again, but they did respond similarly. And then lastly, our total yield. So we did have a bit of a dry summer or really wet spring that led us to planting late, and then a dry summer and dry fall. But with that, we were still able to get some yields for our intercrop systems with sorghum, sudangrass, and sudangrass at 3.5 tons of dry matter per acre to 3.7 tons of dry matter per acre with our summer annual. And so our last cutting, we did take a bit more of alfalfa with it. So we lowered the cutting bar. We didn't care if we didn't want the summer annual to survive at this point. And so we picked up some of the alfalfa as well at this point, and it did contribute a little bit, but not a lot per tonnage for that intercrop system. While our alfalfa monoculture alone, when we took that final harvest, had about 0.75 tons per acre of dry matter for that year. And so we were seeing increased yields. We did have a little bit of a rough year on establishment in general, but we're still looking forward to the future to see how this is actually going to turn out in its first production year. And so overall, we did see that yield varied among our summer annuals. Sorghum, sudangrass did have a higher yield in the intercropping system, and it did help boost yields for our first establishment year. Our stand counts, they were affected by our planting date. Our fall typically had higher plant counts still compared to our late summer, early spring, or our spring planting date. And then we had alfalfa variation as well. Our conventional traditional type did better than our Harv Extra, and then the Harv Extra did a little better than our potato leaf hopper resistance, which we were a little surprised about. We had high hopes for the potato leaf hopper resistance to do a little better in this system, but this is just the first year data, and so there's still more to come. And then we saw that it was affected by the summer annuals. Our monocultures did establish best in this system so far. And then our sorghum, sudangrass, and sudangrass had similar responses on our establishment. We still have some things to continue, really looking at spring counts and seeing how well it has survived winter and was able to overwinter, and how our first cutting of our alfalfa yield will be impacted by this intercropping system. And with that, we are actually hoping to continue this system. One of the things that we're looking at is continuing this, planting the summer annual, and a continuation of a intercropping system into year 2 and 3. And so what this would look like is we take our first cutting of alfalfa, and then right behind that, we come in and we plant our summer annuals. And we want to, again, we'll probably plant this at about 30-inch rows, trying not to affect the stand as we can continue into more production years. And so after we plant it, sorghum, our summer annuals are really quick growers, so they can start to get on a 30 to 35 day cutting schedule. And then we plan to cut the alfalfa and the summer annual together moving forward. This is also an opportunity when we're thinking about stands that are dying out, coming in and seeing how to be able to boost those stands for another year. Planting a summer annual could be a potential really good opportunity in that. And so that's partly why we want to continue on to see how this system could work. And with that, I just want to recognize some of my funders, which is Midwest Forage Association, and then the U.S. AFRI grant in sustainable agricultural systems. And my information is on the slide if you have any questions. And thank you.